Hello guys, and welcome back to HJW Gaming, and my first video on the new PBE changes coming in Rise to War 2.0. Now, quite a few other content creators have done kind of large scale, very in-depth guides on PBE, and if you're looking for that, I definitely recommend checking them out. There are some brilliant guides out there. This is kind of intended to be more of like a bite-sized guide for those of you who don't want to watch hour-long videos covering every minutiae of change. So I'm going to kind of summarise what the changes are here, so that any of you that are unaware of what changes are in the PBE server, maybe because you don't have access or haven't watched any of the other videos yet, I can kind of summarise it here, and you can make your own opinion as to what you think Rise to War 2.0 is going to look like. Kind of a couple of things to mention in the prologue beforehand. First thing is that there is pre-registration available now for Rise to War 2.0, available in the link shown here, which is www.lotr-risetowar.com/new version. There are rewards available for everyone in all servers when those pre-registrations hit 30,000 players. I think it's kind of to help the devs get a guide as to how many active players there still are in the game, or will be in the game when Rise to War 2.0 comes out, as of course many players have many different accounts, so that's not exactly a good gauge of active players. So yeah, this pre-registration can kind of help flag yourself up, and yeah, you'll get rewards as a result. I don't really see a downside to it. The other thing to mention as well is that all this information I give here is definitely subject to change. The PBE server is kind of constantly being updated off the back of testing and player feedback. For example, there's this quote from one of the update releases from the devs, which says kind of after PBE ends, they will adjust and optimize content based on the player feedback and suggestions before they release it live. So just be aware that there will be changes off the back of this, but this is kind of summarising the changes currently available in the PBE server. And also, there's currently no defined date, as far as I'm aware, for when the PBE servers will be moved into live, and therefore Rise to War 2.0 will start, or what effect that will have on servers that are currently underway at the time. So kind of wait for more information on that. If there is a massive update released, I will definitely be covering that in a future video. So yeah, kind of keep your eyes peeled for that. With that out of the way, let's look now and begin to look at the PBE changes that are available, will be available when this comes live. The first of those is formations. Now, I've kind of started straight off the bat with probably the most radical change based on the current game, and that is the introduction of formations. If you've played any other kind of similar games to Rise to War, I believe Rise to Kingdoms has this as well, or Rise of Kingdoms has this. This is a massive, massive change for how the game currently works. So, as you'll be aware currently, you currently use a single commander, and you use 3 different, or up to 3 different troops in his troop composition, and then you march that single commander around the map, taking tiles and engaging in combat with that single commander. When he gets into battles, the battles involve damage being dealt by both the commander and by his troops, and the battle lasts until one of the sides has lost all its units, or at the end of 10 rounds, at which point it's declared a draw. And when troops are defeated, a portion of these are sent to the apothecary for healing, and this comes at the expense of time and grain for the healing, which of course you can speed up as well with gems. Now, the massive change to this is that you no longer operate with a single commander. Marches now consist of what's called a formation, which consists of up to 4 different commanders operating all together with their own troops. Each commander in a formation can lead a single troop type. So you can put one individual troop, and the amount of troops they have on there is determined by a preset stat, which I'll cover in commander stats later on. And the battles involve all commanders and all troops, and both can deal damage, similar to previous, And the battle lasts until all sides has lost all units and commanders have been killed, or at the end of round 10. So the difference here is that commanders now have their own HP stat and can be killed in battle. This is a big change because, of course, previously when all units were lost, the commander would march back, but the commander himself could not be injured. Whereas now the commanders, once they're killed, will stop operating in that battle. Their skills and buffs will no longer be relevant, and they'll stop personally dealing damage. And then on top of that, a portion of troops and the commanders themselves are sent to your apothecary and require healing when defeated. The cost of healing these now includes energy, so previously stamina, which is taken from your shared energy pool, which again I'll cover more on that later on. And you can see from the screenshots at the bottom, I've got a little show of the apothecary we're all familiar with. But now you can see that healing requires energy from your commander. So in this case, 9 energy from the shared energy pool. And that can be expensive, as of course, if you use 10 energy, 9 energy to heal your commander, that's half a march. So you can very quickly find yourself bottlenecked and unable to march because your commander's been defeated too many times. But mainly the fact that you have to use 4 commanders just to do one march, or at least the most efficient way to do one march, is a massive, massive change. And will lead to, of course, people mainly focusing and only having one formation marching round at a time, rather than having multiple commanders all leveled up simultaneously. Commanders themselves have also had a massive overhaul. So currently, when you look into your commander's skills, your commander has 4 headline skills, and each of those has 2 sub-skills underneath, which you can put skill points into. Each headline skill can have up to 15 skill points, and each sub-skill 7 skill points. Respect levels capped at respect level 25, and each respect level provides you with 1 additional skill point. So the new system, which has changed very, very dramatically again, is that commanders now only have 4 headline talents. The sub-skills have all been removed. The additional kind of effect activation when you maximize your skill has been removed. However, there are now significant boosts within those skills at levels 5 and 10. Level 10 is now the maximum number of skill points you can put into each of these skills, and it takes 3 skill points to increase a skill level, which seems wild to me, because what's the point of a skill point if it takes 3 of them to increase a skill level? Why not just reduce down the number of skill points required to increase to maximize and make it 1 skill point as 1 level still? That seems wild to me. But anyway, and with the shift to formations, commander skills can affect your single commander. It can affect his army, but it can also place beneficial buffs on the enemy formation or commanders, or even other armies and commanders within your own formation, which is a very, very big change. Of course, the skills as a result in all commanders have changed pretty drastically. The kind of style of most commanders won't have changed massively, so like damage dealer commanders would likely remain damage dealer commanders, and troop buff commanders will likely remain troop buff commanders. But the way they get to kind of this end, the means of which will have changed pretty significantly due to alterations to these skills. Respect level has changed pretty heavily as well. There are now respect level milestones every 5 respect levels, which grant an additional 5 skill points. So there's 2 skill points unlocked every respect level between respect 1 and 10, after which you gain 1 respect level, other than respect levels 5, 10, 15, 20, 25, where you gain those additional 5 skill points. So there's going to be a real push towards getting commanders, particularly to those higher respect levels. I'm thinking 15, 20, 25, so you get those massive increases in skill points. And the next change is the introduction of the ascension system. Now, I will do a video to cover this more in depth, but just to give you a brief summary, you essentially spend respect on a commander, so respect items or just respect on the commander, to increase your commander's stats permanently. You lose skill points, but you gain additional stats for that commander. So, for example, whereas we currently have the tier system, you have tier 1 commanders, tier 2s and tier 3s, you can essentially choose. So say I chose, so you look at my example on the right, Gandalf the Grey here is outlined in gold, which means he's in the legendary tier, whereas he's normally kind of a tier 2 commander. So what that means is that's been spent, some respect items have been spent to ascend him to a tier 3 or legendary commander, which will have increased his stats. Now the reason kind of given for this is that therefore the tier 1 commanders can become more relevant and stronger with the increase in their stats, though I'm not necessarily sure that's necessary, as in the current Rise to War meta, tier 1 commanders are very much prevalent there. I'm thinking of Frenzy Dwalin, of course, being right up in the S tier, Frenzy Khaldun also being one of the strongest. You also regularly see others like, say, Grima, for example. You know, there's a lot of tier 1 commanders that are very, very usable. So, yeah, I'm not sure whether kind of going with this one, whether a boost in stats for tier 1s is really necessary. But if it makes more commanders usable, I suppose, then potentially it could be a good change. I just want to wait and see how it's balanced, as it could be a little bit broken. There's also an additional tier added, so almost like a tier 4 commander, if you want to put it that way. There's something called Zenith tier added, which is for when you get a tier 3 commander or a legendary tier commander. So of course if you've buffed other commanders up to that legendary tier, then you get them up to respect level 15. You can then push them up to a Zenith tier. Now again, I will discuss this system kind of more in depth in the future, but this to me just seems like kind of an opportunity, a little bit of a money grab almost. They're adding basically additional respect level tiers to encourage those kind of real big spenders that have already hit respect level 25 on a lot of their strongest commanders. They're just giving them more room to further increase that increase that spending and pull more money in from those players. And it's going to further increase the gap between pay to win and free to play players and kind of all of those in between. Because if you end up with a Zenith tier commander, respect level then 25, whatever it is, it's going to be wild, and it's going to be obviously another level of strength altogether. But as I say, I'll cover that further in another video and my kind of opinions on this. But yeah, that's a massive change, adding a tier 4 commander. Tier 4 commander in substance, that they call it, that Zenith tier. Next up are the commander stats, which are kind of part of that overhaul. So kind of commander stats have been consistent throughout the game. You have the commander's role, for example, on Witch King here on the screenshot. He's given the leader role, meaning he can have an extra 5 command in his army compared to other commanders of the same level with a different role. You also get warrior, for example, on Dwalin, which increases the commander damage dealt by the commander, as well as providing additional might and skill points. Those have essentially been removed. However, each commander now has, instead of that, it lists a maximum number of units that commander can lead. So, for example, Dane here in the below screenshot, which if I move out the way you can see most of it, has 800 troops that he can which he can lead. So you'll see kind of, where is it, just above my finger and just above the respect level, you'll see he can lead 800 troops. Then you have the kind of base stats of your commander. You have might, focus and speed. So might affects the commander's normal attack damage and the damage buff that he gives to his troops. Focus provides elemental damage resistance and provides damage received buffs for your troops. And speed affects your commander's turn order and also increases your unit speed, which can then have a knock-on effect of improving their turn order. It also improves your commander's march speed across the terrain. And then lastly you have command, which decides the number of units that you can lead into battle, which of course we know has already changed. As I mentioned, the number of units a commander can now lead has been changed and put into the place of the roles. So with those stats changes, what's now come into effect is might essentially has been replaced by a stat called attack, which is a little more simple to understand, I suppose, than might for new players coming in. An attack affects the damage dealt from your commander's attacks and your commander only. It doesn't provide an additional buff to your troops. Similarly, defense dictates the damage resistance for your individual commander, and these only again affect your commander themselves, not the troops, and doesn't provide a buff. Speed again is the march order for your commander, and I believe it also changes how quickly they march across the battlefield, but not any buff to troops once again. And then they've got the command stat, which, though same in name, is very different in nature. The command stat is instead changed to be a statistic that determines the amount of buff that you give to your troops. So the higher the command of your commander, the higher the buff he will give to his troops. So it's kind of a combination of that troop element of might, focus and speed. And commanders, of course, now fall into the battle queue and have an HP stat and can be damaged similar to troops. Therefore, healing commanders becomes almost as important as reinforcing the rest of your troops. Potentially even more important, as of course, if your commander gets wiped out on the battlefield, he'll no longer provide those beneficial skills to your troops, which obviously are kind of the main determinant of how much damage you do within a battle. So this is a huge factor and a huge change. So if I move out the way a little bit, you can see those changes on this bottom screenshot. You can see attack, defense, command and speed along the bottom, and you can see the commander's damage, HP and command stats as well. So this is quite a radical change again, but most of the stats do pretty similar to what they did previously. It's just that change to command will be one to get used to, determining how well your commander buffs the troops. Units themselves have had a similar overhaul stats wise. So in the current system, units are divided into command, with one command containing a number of troops. Most units have 100 command per unit. However, some troops like cavalry have 50 units in a command, and others like chariots, for example, have 4 units per command, and that change is basically dependent on the size of the unit, and their stats vary accordingly to keep them balanced. Unit stats and effectiveness are determined by kind of their individual damage stats. They have a damage range for each unit, and they also have defense, HP and speed, and then they have individual bonuses or kind of bonus stats that can be upgraded with gold. So I'm thinking, say, like the I've got the Dwarven Footman shown on this side for the new PBE, but in the old version he'd have like the Rupture skill, and you'd have to spend gold to improve that, to therefore increase the effectiveness of that stat. And recruitment queues must be allocated always to different units, so you can have, as your conscription post levels up in your keep, you can train more and more queues basically, and they must be allocated always to different troops, so it makes kind of mono stacking and things like that less effective, as you can only train kind of 5,000 dwarves, for example, guardians at a time. In the new system, there is going to be a big overhaul in regards to the way troops work. Small troops are now given a value of 1, medium given a value of 2, and large a different value depending on how large the unit is. Examples can be 20, 25, 50 or even 100, meaning that you essentially only get 1 unit per 100 units that your commander can take. So for example, the Dane I shown previously that had 800 would only be able to have 8 of those really large units, which I believe is limited to really large units like the Mummakil. Units are now also divided into a category, and a countering system has been introduced. So the 3 categories are small, medium and large. And the formation lead commander determines the countering relationship as far as I'm aware. Small units counter large units counter medium, and medium units counter small. And you'll get kind of damage bonuses and damage received buffs depending on how you fall within this countering relationship. So this will be kind of a huge shift within the meta, and a massive determinant of which commanders are seen as most viable, as if you get caught on the wrong side of that countering relationship, it will vastly affect how effective you are in a given fight. The unit's individual stats have also changed to now have attack instead of damage to determine the amount of damage that they deal to the enemy heroes, whereas the damage stat itself is how much damage they deal to the troops. So there's almost two different stats for how effective they are in battle, which will likely see an introduction of some troops which are specifically designed around the attack stat to take out enemy commanders but may have low damage, or vice versa. So troops which are designed to have high damage and take out troops but will have low attack, so be very ineffective against the commander. So this will likely see troops introduced like that, which can be good against, say a high attack troop will be very useful for coming up against damage commanders like Dane or Gimli, for example, as it will target the commander themselves. The unit skills are now no longer upgradable with gold. They just have a skill, and has base effectiveness no matter what. And so they still exist, and they work in synergy with the countering system. And you can now dedicate more than one queue to the same unit. So for example, if you're running only Guardians amongst your formation, you can dedicate every single queue to the Guardian if you wish, so you can have multiple conscripting all at the same time. Next up, I said I'd kind of double back to it. We have the shared energy pool. This again is going to make a huge change up in the way we play the game, and it's probably one of the reasons that people really dislike PBE. And I'm not going to go too much into my opinions. I know I've given some already, but I'll share that kind of in another video when I kind of break down individual bits a little bit more. But we have the shared energy pool. So currently each commander has an individual stamina value, and a march takes up, say, 20 stamina from, I think it's 150 once the ring skill is taken to improve commander stamina, 120 before that. And you take up 20 stamina per march as long as you haven't got the first 24-hour buff. And you can basically march until that commander's stamina is drained. And you can also increase each individual commander's stamina through use of the abundant endurance skill, and you can regain stamina over time or by using a stamina potion. Now, this is one of the big changes, is so that stamina for each individual commander regains a rate of around 180 seconds per stamina, but there's no limit to how many can be regaining at once. So you can use all your stamina on 6 different commanders and have all of those regaining 1 stamina every 180 seconds. So effectively, if you use 6 commanders, every 180 seconds you're regenerating 6 stamina, which is very different with the shared energy pool, which is where instead you have an overall pool of energy which dictates which actions you can take. If you look at the screenshot at the bottom, this shows how much stamina is or energy now is used for each action. So things like marches and moving remain at 20 energy. Similar with sweeping and gathering. Most of these stats are very similar, though there is now the addition of commander treatment, for example, which also uses up some energy from this pool. Now the main change to this is that every single action you take takes it from this shared pool. So if you move one formation, you use 20 stamina. If you then use, or 20 energy, if you then move a second formation, that again uses 20 energy from your shared pool. So this almost incentivizes using only one formation and just continually using the same formation over and over again, as you can kind of build the strongest formation you possibly can and then dedicate all of your energy, which is likely to be your bottleneck, particularly in PvP, but yeah, will be PvE as well. And you can just build the strongest formation you possibly can and dedicate all of your energy to that, because it would seem wasteful to dedicate energy to kind of a lower tier formation when you can just keep running that higher one over and over again. So that would be a big change. And this is also going to lead to a massive change in kind of what you see currently in PvP, which is kind of that tile warfare, where people send out multiple commanders with very low command just to take tiles in and around the enemy troops and kind of give them more tiles to have to clean up and things like that, and try and waste opponents' commander stamina. That's no longer going to be an effect, because you're going to end up using up your shared energy pool on a non-attacking commander, which would be a waste. So you're going to see kind of the death of that tactic, which is unfortunate. The other thing is that stamina regenerates at 1 point every 45 seconds. However, because that 1 point is shared, you can't regenerate more than one every 45 seconds. You can't have multiple regenerating at once, similar to what you could have with the commanders. So this is going to massively shake up, with the formation system, how you choose which commanders you want to use, what their kind of roles are in your strategy. You no longer have like dedicated tile commanders, things like that. You might have a dedicated siege formation maybe, but that'll be about it. That'll vary away from your kind of PvE, PvP formation. It's very likely that's what happened. Everyone will fall in line and everyone will just kind of have one marching around the battlefield, which I think is a massive shame. As I say, I don't want to give too many opinions, but it's quite enjoyable when you get into these massive wars to see arrows everywhere, and you have real value for, you've got your real strong players running out of the front, and then you've got those who maybe aren't as strong but still just engage in that tile warfare and just make things difficult for the opponents and waste stamina so that the real big players can then take advantage of that. And it's just a massive change up to the strategy, this shared energy pool. Now, last up, we have equipment changes, which is another very big change that we could talk about kind of until the cows come home. But I'll try and summarise it the best I can to keep this concise. So how the current system works, as you're aware, is items can increase the might, focus, and speed for the commander, as well as increasing unit stats and providing additional buffs, as well as additional skills and things like that. Items are individual and they don't link to others. Each item kind of has its own effects, and that stays kind of within that item and can pass between commanders as you equip it to different commanders. You can currently strengthen equipment up to 5 times, which provides additional bonuses to that might, focus, or say unit attack that it provides. But you can also refine, which will increase the effectiveness of the buff on that item. Most equipment, when you get it from a chest, can only have kind of up to 5 secondary effects. And each secondary effect is limited to be available on only kind of 2 to 3 items. For example, the very popular Frenzy effect being limited to only the Gigantic Hammer and the Morgul Blade. And unique equipment falls within the existing equipment slots. So, for example, Dane Ironfoot's helm falls within the helm category, so you'd have to remove his other helm. So, for example, if you had a purple full helm on him and then got his unique, you'd have to remove that to equip his unique item. Under the new system, equipment now has different stats, so it can increase the commander's combat stats, so the newly built-in attack and defense. Strengthening remains. You can strengthen up to 5 times. However, refinement has been removed. So similar to individual unit buffs we saw earlier, where you no longer have to spend gold to improve them, the buff on an item stays exactly as it is and cannot be refined or increased, with the exception of unique items. Bonuses now have a required number of matching items that need to also be equipped before the bonus will activate. So items now need to be equipped in like a set, which will say on the item, it will say, for example, 1 out of 3, and you have to equip 3 items with exactly the same buff before that buff will activate. So it actually requires you to keep gear in sets and think about it a little bit more rather than burning everything into strengthening, as if you of course lose an item from that set, that buff will no longer be effective. And the number of secondary effects available to each item has increased significantly. Items can now have 5, 6, 7 different effects, possibly ranging from increased siege down to damage. So you'll have to be very careful again when strengthening, as you don't want to lose a desirable item that could form part of a future set. And unique items, now this is a huge change, really huge, that will be kind of meta defining. Unique items now have their own individual slot. So if you see just above my kind of shoulder here with Dane Ironfoot, he has the usual 4 equipment slots. He has a helm still equipped. However, he also has his unique item equipped on top of this. So this means that you get the unit stat buffs from this, as well as the secondary effects on top of all other equipment. Now again, this is another thing I'll cover in more detail in a future video, but this will again be meta defining. In combination with formations requiring you to use 4 different commanders and the ascension system, where if you ascend your commanders to higher tiers, you get bonus stats on your commander and to your units. This is going to be another thing that prompts the use of only one formation. Again, you can see where they're going with this. The shared energy pool also points that way. The reason for this is if you have a commander that doesn't have his individual item, you're basically losing out on a massive pool of available stats. So if you think about using in the current game, you wouldn't send your commander out with only a weapon and a chest piece equipped and no helm or no accessory, because the amount of stats you lose would be kind of battle defining, and you'd likely lose it even if you're potentially even a higher level. You just wouldn't do that because the stats you'd lose would be massive. And that's going to be similar here if you don't have the unique item on your commander. You're almost required to have the unique item and strengthen it and potentially even refine it to make a difference in the battle. And you're going to need to do this for 4 commanders, which means that you are going to need to you're going to need to really focus all of your gear and all of your respect into 4 commanders for 1 formation. Unless you are like a mega whale, spent a huge amount of money, it's unlikely you're going to be able to focus on more than 1 formation and get them to the required high amount of respect and get their unique item as well. Now there is also a change up to the way Mithril works to getting respect items. There is no longer blue, purple and gold Mithril. There is now just one type of Mithril, and all Mithril you currently possess will be converted upon the turnover to PBE or Rise to War 2.0, will be converted at an available rate into that one type of Mithril. So of course legendary gold Mithril will convert into more of the new Mithril than the blue, for example, for those who've spent a lot of real life currency to obtain this gold Mithril. But yeah, you're basically going to need your commander's unique item. The other thing to mention is that there are going to be available item exchanges, but you're not required to use them. So if you want to keep your current gear, for example a Frenzy Gigantic Hammer, you can choose to keep that item with its strengthening and refinement and all of its available stats exactly the same in the run-up to 2.0. That's been announced in one of the developer updates. However, you can exchange an item if you want. I believe it's 10 different pieces of equipment per day for the first 30 days once Rise to War 2.0 comes out. You can exchange old equipment to new equipment. Whilst keeping your old equipment does sound like a bit of a boon, and a lot of people will be happy with that, I think what they're going to do is they're going to make it significantly less effective to use the old style gear. For example, Frenzy will not synergize well with commander skills, or Might Focus being a null and void stat will not give the represented increase to attack and defense. So something like that to incentivize you to change your gear to the new style. So something to be wary of coming up with the updates. But yeah, you can exchange 10 pieces of equipment per day for 30 days to the new style. So you can, and that includes changing new style equipment again to new style if you want to try and get different items or different buffs. So just make sure you use that 10 wisely. Have a look at which commanders you think are going to be meta when the game comes out. Again, I will be doing a video on what I think are or will be the meta commanders when Rise to War 2.0 comes out, based on the current PvE server. But you're going to want to make a decision on which commanders you want to use, which 4 in your formation, and work towards getting the corresponding gear for them, as well as the highest respect level possible, so that you can have the most effective formation when Rise to War 2.0 is released. Right, with that, that's everything from me. Hopefully I've given you guys kind of a executive summary of what the main changes are in the current PvE server and what's likely to come in Rise to War 2.0. There are kind of more minutiae into this. You can go a little bit more in depth, and I will try and look at each of these individual pieces in a little bit more depth in future videos. But for this summary, I hope it's given you a good grasp of what is coming, and I really hope you've found some benefit to that. If you have, please smash the like button, and please also consider hitting subscribe to see more of my content on Rise to War and my PBE content for Rise to War 2.0 as well. And yeah, I really appreciate all support. And with that, I hope to see you on the next one.